today's Harper James webinar on Buy Now, Pay Later credit and the changes that are coming in July this year. Now, the focus of this session is on merchants, primarily those selling goods to consumers, both in-store and online. It's useful for any merchant, whether they already offer credit or whether they're thinking about doing so in the future. And the focus is very much on the practical impact on merchants and their customers that the July changes are going to bring. By way of introduction, I'm John Pauley. I'm a partner and head of financial services at Harper James. I started my legal career at DLA Piper, after which I joined a boutique firm that specialised in financial services. And I then joined Harper James some 7 years ago now. Prior to embarking on my legal career, I did spend another decade working in financial services at MBNA Bank on a range of project, compliance and risk management roles. I'm joined today by my colleague in the financial services team, Charles Rogers.
Hi there. Similar to John, I've worked in financial regulation law for a while. I trained at one of Scotland's leading commercial firms specialising in financial regulation, and then worked at the FCA for about 5 years as an in-house lawyer there, mainly focusing on consumer credit before joining Harper James around the start of 2024.
Thanks, Charles. Now, before we get started with the webinar, there are just a few housekeeping points to cover. Firstly, you will have all joined the webinar in listen-only mode, and the presenters' cameras are the only ones that are active. You can submit questions at any time that you have for us by typing in the question pane at the top right of the control panel, on the right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. Charles and I will run through as many of them as possible in the Q&A time available at the end of the webinar, which will be in about 30 minutes' time. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please click the raised hand symbol or the chat symbol towards the top right of your screen, and one of our colleagues will hopefully be able to help you. We will be recording the webinar and we will send a link for it to you after the webinar. You're welcome to share it with colleagues or rewatch it if you'd like to do so. Now, that's it for housekeeping, so let's get started with the webinar. So why does this all matter? What do the changes mean? Well, this session is going to be important to your business if you currently offer buy now, pay later credit at checkouts for a third-party provider like Clearbank or Klarna. It's also important to merchants if you're reviewing whether your current provider or lender that you're working with that provides buy now or later credit is the right fit for you and your customers and your business model. It's also relevant if you're considering offering credit at any point in the future, whether that's buy now, pay later style credit or perhaps other credit options which might have longer terms and maybe have interest attracted to them. And it's also important to consider from a competitive advantage point of view. For example, some businesses find it very advantageous to have the facility to offer credit because it can help get additional business. Now, a key point to note, these changes that are coming in July are not just important for the lenders or providers that work in the industry, it's also a commercial operational compliance issue for merchants. So it's important to understand what's involved. So a couple of key dates to mention, and you'll notice one of them has already passed. The first one's the 15th of May 2026. Now, this is important because it's the date on which the temporary permissions window opened. Well, what's a temporary permissions window? Well, this is the period during which firms can apply to either become authorised by the FCA so they can carry on entering into buy now, pay later credit agreements, or if they're already authorised, they can apply for additional permissions so that they can carry on doing so. So this is important because if providers don't act, they may no longer be able to provide these services to you and your customers. So merchants should be checking the readiness of their provider to ensure they're lined up, they're aware, and they're taking the appropriate action. Otherwise, come July, they may not be able to provide these services to you and your customers. So what happens in July? Well, currently, a lot of the buy now, pay later credit, or as the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, refer to it now, deferred payment credit, that's currently unregulated, will become regulated. So that means a lot of changes for lenders and consumers, but also merchants offering these credit products. things like authorization, regulatory permissions, but also the checks that are conducted on the consumers who take out these products and the rights they have once they've done so. So a key point to note is that providers may already be authorised, but as mentioned above, even if they're authorised by the FCA currently, they will still need to obtain this new permission that becomes effective in July. So it's important to check with your provider, because even though they might be authorised already, it could impact your customer journey and the way your products and services are set up and offered on your website. So what is changing? Well, from the 15th of July, in-scope buy now, later credit, now deferred payment credit products will be subject to a new regulatory regime. This means that lenders will need to meet certain requirements that have been in place for other regulated consumer credit agreements for some time. This includes clearer customer disclosures, both before they've taken out such products, but also the terms and conditions involved and any customer support information. Lenders will be required to carry out affordability checks, so checking the credit file of customers, making sure they can afford the loans. And also there's specific requirements in relation to support for customers in financial difficulty, complaints handling and redress requirements, including access to the financial ombudsman. Currently, customers that take unregulated buy now, pay later credit don't have the right to complain to the financial ombudsman. But if they take such agreements out from July onwards, they will do. Another key point to mention is financial promotions and customer communications. There are certain requirements if you're communicating or offering the ability for customers to take out these products that you must comply with. And likewise, you've got to be clear, fair, and not misleading in any communications with customers in relation to such products as well. Now, why does this matter to merchants? Well, the changes can affect quite a lot of different things. So it might impact whether or not your current buy now, pay later setup remains commercially attractive. It could affect the smoothness of the checkout journey and the integration that you currently have with your provider. And that includes the onboarding of customers, but also, looking out for friction. Might this introduce new steps, new information requirements that could have an impact on your sales and your customers? Might the providers change their fees? Most of them are going to have to undergo a lot more vigorous activities and compliance burdens than they did before when they were unregulated. So there's a good chance that both your fees and the commercial terms you enter into with your providers might change, because they may also need you to do more to ensure compliance with the new requirements. Important point to note about sort of conversion and basket value. Often merchants that offer such credit get increased value in their baskets and increased conversion, because there's a higher chance that customers may purchase. So it's worth considering this in your customer journey. Doesn't apply to all business models, but it certainly applies to some, so it's worth considering. And then, of course, as already mentioned, customer communications and complaints handling. What will you need to do? Will you have any changes? When do you have to refer complaints over to the provider? Providers should be beginning to tell you information about this, but it's best to ask rather than assume. So remember, provider readiness is only part of the picture. And the trouble for merchants is this could mean that well-prepared providers may introduce additional costs, and it's also likely that some processes will change, because it's certainly the case that information will change, and some of the procedures the providers will have to carry out will also change. Now, what should you be looking at now? What should you review? Well, as we've already mentioned, it's key to check in with your provider. Are they aware of what's coming? What changes have they made? Are they going to continue providing buy now, pay later credit? And if so, are they already authorised? Are they applying to become authorised? What about the agreements you have with your providers? What changes are they looking to make, if any? And what does this mean commercially for you? What about your website and your checkout processes? Also, if you operate stores, what about in-store as well? What changes are you going to need to make, and what impact is that going to have on your current sales processes? Similarly, any FAQs you might have on your website, or supporting pages and customer-facing messaging, what needs to change? Likewise with complaints handling. Are you already sort of set up for differentiating between complaints about your products and complaints about the finance taken out in relation to the same? Who within your business is going to be responsible for this process and making sure that you maintain customer satisfaction and good standards while the changes are being made and implemented? Who's going to be responsible for that journey and making sure the changes are implemented? And also a big consideration is whether or not you might want to offer a buy now, pay later credit yourself directly to consumers and customers. So it's an important point to note that while third-party deferred payment credit will become authorised in July 2026, if a merchant wishes to offer credit themselves, they can still use the old buy now, pay later credit exclusion going forward and can offer credit directly to themselves without becoming regulated. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. I'm now going to hand over to Charles, who's going to tell you a little bit about financial promotions in relation to these products.
Thanks, John. Yes, we wanted to spend a bit of time looking at this because this is about how merchants communicate this payment method to customers. So merchants offering BNPL commonly communicate financial promotions where the messaging amounts to an invitation or inducement to enter into a credit agreement, and the threshold for that is relatively low. So many typical retail communications will fall within scope. So we've put a few examples up on the slide, but these can include website product pages that promote the BNPL features, where it will say things like buy now, pay later with Klarna, pay in 3 interest-free installments. These sort of statements that encourage customers to use the credit product are usually likely to be financial promotions. But also the messaging that appears at checkout, where you have examples such as pay £30 today and pay the rest later with Zilch, or split your purchase into 3 payments with ClearPay. And merchants often use a process called price anchoring, where an installment pricing is displayed alongside the full price. So if you said something like £120 today or 3 payments of £40 with Klarna, presenting the credit installments in that way encourages the use of the credit facility. And then you've also got your marketing campaigns across any sort of media, which includes emails, social media channels, paid advertising that reference BNPL options, as well as your in-store signage, but also things like app notifications where they encourage customers to spread the cost. So that's in contrast to where it's purely informational references being made, just listing payment methods available at checkout. That's more likely to be a pure introduction, which I'll come on to in a moment. But once the messaging starts to highlight the benefits of credit or encourages its use, it's generally going to be treated as a financial promotion. So an important question we wanted to sort of dig into is, why is a promotion of an exempt BNPL agreement, as they currently are, likely to be caught by the financial promotion restriction? Now, that's a bit of a technical answer, so bear with me. But Section 21 of FSMA, which creates the financial promotion restriction, applies to invitations or inducements to engage in the course of business and carry on controlled activities related to controlled investments. Now, the relevant controlled activity is entering into a relevant credit agreement. The definition of a relevant credit agreement refers to a credit agreement as defined under the Regulated Activities Order. Now, that's important because it doesn't say a regulated credit agreement, which is another defined term. So the fact that it just refers to a credit agreement demonstrates that it includes even exempt agreements, such as those currently able to rely on the BNPL exemption. And that's the reason that even where the agreement itself is an exempt agreement, the financial promotion can still be caught. And that's brought out by the FCA's Dear CEO letter, which we have an image of on the next slide. And that makes clear that financial promotions, even where they're related to exempt BNPL, still need to comply with certain regulatory requirements. Now, the letter does also refer to an exemption from the financial promotion restriction, which is for introductions, and that can apply, but only in very restricted circumstances. So a merchant that isn't authorized could potentially rely on that, where all of the following apply: simply passing the customer's details onto the FCA authorized lender or a broker, Also avoiding describing or recommending a particular finance product, and finally disclosing any any commission or referral fee. So you can see there's quite a lot that has to be met there, and it's unlikely to apply. And the risk increases if the merchant at all markets the finance itself, explains or compares lending terms, or even positions that a lender as a recommended option. And that's why we come on to talk about here the approval permission for financial promotions, which is what's quite useful going forward. So just to explain where things were and where they are now, in the past, any authorised firm could could approve all financial promotions for an unauthorised person. That changed in February 2024, where the FCA's created a financial promotion approval gateway. So since then, that broadly restricts authorised firms from approving financial promotions without a new FCA permission, unless an exemption applies. But an important exemption for lenders is that even if they don't have this new approver permission, where they prepare the content of the communication themselves, they can then approve it for onward transmission by an unauthorised person. So what that means for merchants is if you're working with a lender, they can prepare the material, and as long as it's using that approved format, it's still okay to use it. So in practice, there's 3 key areas probably to focus on for merchants: auditing marketing materials, reviewing all existing content, making sure that any references to buy now, pay later and going forward deferred payment credit complies with the FCA requirements because it's been properly approved. Only use those approved assets. So check that anything you're already using has been lender approved and reviewed for regulatory compliance. And then linking back into some of the things John was talking about, reviewing the customer journey, assessing the checkout and payment flows to ensure they can accommodate any of that additional customer information collection, the creditworthiness and affordability checks required, and ensuring the clear provision of information to customers. And so I'll pass back to John at this stage.
Thank you, Charles. So what would happen if you don't do anything? Well, obviously, it's best to be prepared. It's best to know where your provider's at if you're already offering buy now, pay later credit. You run the risk, if you don't, of sort of incurring higher costs. You may end up having more friction in your customer journey, sort of having to make last minute changes that are perhaps unexpected and you haven't been able to sort of plan for adequately. If you don't do anything, you're most likely going to have outdated and non-compliant customer messaging and customer documentation and processes. Most providers and lenders should be aware of the changes, but don't assume. Make sure you're contacting them and asking them. Also, internally within your own operations, you need to be clear on what's happening and what the changes are and how it's going to impact your processes so people can accommodate them accordingly. It's also best to avoid any rush decisions that you might have to make last minute. For example, a last minute change in provider to someone who can provide the services if your existing unregulated provider, for example, can't. And also it might be a missed opportunity to review potential alternatives. There are plenty of providers in this market, but many of whom are already regulated, some of whom will be becoming regulated. It might be an opportunity to look around. And also, you could consider other options, such as providing it yourself, which we'll go into a little bit later. Now, in some cases, the issue could be disruption or loss of buy now, pay later credit, which could obviously have a massive impact in your sales and your day-to-day business. In others, however, it may be cost complexity and sort of compliance issues and making sure that you do what you need to. So what are your options? So we've touched upon a few of these already. So first and foremost, number one option is arguably to stay with your current provider, but you need to check their readiness. What status are they? Are they already FCA authorised? If so, are they applying for the new regulatory permission for deferred payment credit? If they're not already authorised, are they using the temporary permissions window to apply for authorisation? So they'll be able to continue to provide credit to your customers come July. What does this mean for your agreement? What costs might change? But also, what about your processes? What's going to change from your perspective? And also, what is it going to mean for your customers? As previously mentioned, it might be an opportune time to review alternative providers. Maybe compare the offerings and see if there's any improvements you can get on cost or perhaps process and the checkout process for customers. Maybe assess whether another model might work. Obviously, buy now, pay later credit is appropriate for a lot of products, but perhaps if you've got a more varied product range, perhaps with larger value items, you might want to consider opening up and offering credit which is for longer terms than a year, maybe even with interest. Now, one other option, which may be overlooked by some merchants, is the ability to offer deferred payment credit yourself without being authorised. So one of the key things about this change in July, while it impacts third-party lenders, your likes of Clearbank and Klarna, it doesn't actually impact merchants. So some retailers themselves offer deferred payment credit directly and will still be able to in July, provided that credit is repayable in under 12 months, in 12 or fewer payments, and has no interest or charges attached to it. You would obviously need a compliant agreement, and to sort of Charles's point earlier, you must ensure your financial promotions are compliant, so they're approved, for example, by an appropriately authorised firm. You would obviously have to introduce new processes, and you'd be taking on credit risk, but these are things that can be addressed if you get the appropriate advice. So what will this look like in practice? Well, merchants that are already using a major buy now, pay later provider, likes of Klarna or Clearbank, I would hope have already been in touch. You should have probably already heard from them, and you might not need to switch from provider, but it's likely you're going to have made changes. Your agreements with them are likely to have changed to address this as well. So you need to check what you need to do internally and what that means for you financially. Businesses which have a strong reliance on buy now, pay later credit need to be looking at this as a priority. Without it, it could really be an issue for your business. So you need to be on top of this and make sure that you'll be able to continue business as usual, or if not, business as optimal as possible for you, making sure those changes are making minimal impacts, but still complying with the new changes that will take impact. Now, the other option is, of course, considering going it alone and offering direct instalment credit directly to your consumers. It is something that you can consider. You'd need to sort of set it up. You'd be wise to sort of test it. You need compliant documentation and compliant processes. We can help out with the documentation, for example. If you want a compliant, unregulated credit agreement, is something we can help out with. But you would need involvement of third parties such as FCA authorised firms in order to ensure your financial promotions are compliant, as Charles has set out. So what are the key takeaways and next steps? Well, please don't wait till July. If you haven't already been in touch with your provider, and I'm hoping in many cases your provider, if they're a reputable lender, will have been in touch with you to say what's happening and where they're at. Do check their position. Make sure if they are regulated already that they're applying for the appropriate additional permission, and if they're not already FCA authorised, make sure they are applying. Check your website. That should be in conjunction with any correspondence you've had with your provider. Make sure it's compliant and up to date and reflects any changes that are coming. Probably a good time to assess the model. Is this optimal for you? Is buy now, pay later credit right? And is it going to be right when it moves in July to these new status? Do you want to offer additional credit? Do you want to offer credit yourself? It's always best to act as early as possible to give yourself maximum flexibility, but also to reduce any potential impact to your customers and ensure basically ongoing revenue can continue to come in at levels that you expect without any significant adverse changes to it. Now, how can we help? Well, as already touched on, we can obviously help you with agreements if you want to offer deferred credit yourself. What we can do is help you with a review of the existing processes and those of your providers. We can review agreements and negotiate contracts with your providers if you're looking to change. And we can suggest sort of next steps based on your profile and what might be best for you. Now, that concludes the webinar. We've now got to the Q&A stage where I believe Charles has been having a look at some questions that may have come in, and we will go through some of those now.
Yeah. So a question we've been asked is whether credit broking will remain exempt when the changes come into effect, and it will. So currently merchants, even where they're unauthorized, can carry out introductions to lenders, which would have otherwise been regulated credit broking if it wasn't covered by an exemption. That will remain the case. The FCA consulted on this, and it was clear that trying to create a new regime for merchants to become authorized credit brokers if they weren't already would be overly burdensome, and that the risk of consumer harm was very low. So that should hopefully be a useful exemption moving forward. Another one is asking about the practical implications. So we've tried to bring this out already, but one of the most significant operational changes is around the affordability checks. So checking that customers can afford to enter into these new credit agreements. And then from July 2026, all deferred payment credit transactions will require both creditworthiness and affordability checks, and that's regardless of the order value. So in practice, customers will need to provide additional information, such as perhaps date of birth, address confirmation. Checkout journeys could include some additional steps or even pauses, and that will potentially include some real-time decision-making, such as the approval, decline, or alternative offer becoming standard. Even though the retailers aren't responsible for making those lending decisions, the systems that merchants use will still need to support that process.
Thank you, Charles. So we haven't got any more questions, so that concludes the Q&A session and marks the end of the webinar today. If you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Our financial services team can help you with general regulatory perimeter questions, advising on regulated and unregulated financial services and related agreements. We can assist you across all areas of payment services, e-money and consumer credit activities, to name just a few. On leaving this webinar, we'd be very grateful if you could complete the short feedback questionnaire to help us improve future webinars and for suggested topics. Over the next few days, you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar with some additional information. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and hope you have a great afternoon, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.